Welcome to the channel, everyone, and this is Let's Play MTG. And here on this channel, we will abilities twice, use electrostatic plumber, and so you don't necessarily need to have. What's going on, everyone? This is Anthony Lee with Let's Play MTG. And today we're actually going to talk about my mono green Wurm tribal commander deck. Now this deck, you might think a lot of expensive creatures, your converted mana cost is really high for your creatures, your mana curve is definitely not looking like a bell curve, it's just probably not going to work in synergize with each other. But I'm here to tell you and show you the amazing mono green Wurm tribal commander deck that actually runs pretty quick and is a very powerful deck. So first off, let's go ahead and look through some of the cards that help cheat out your creatures. Now, cheating out creatures basically just means you can get your creatures out by not having to pay a mana cost in one way or another. So let's go ahead and look at the various cards that help do exactly that. Alright, so first off we have Mosswort Bridge. Mosswort Bridge says, Hideaway. This land enters the battlefield tapped. When it does, look at the top 4 cards of your library, exile 1 face down, then put the rest on the bottom of your library. You can tap to add green to mana pool, or you can pay green and tap, and you may play the card exiled without paying its mana cost if creatures you control have power 10 or greater. So you play the card, look at the top 3, preferably you try to find a giant worm creature, and get creatures with total power 10 or greater, especially in this deck, is going to be really easy to go off on. And by paying green and tapping and being able to immediately put that creature into play is huge. And if someone plays a board wipe and it's a creature that when it dies creates creature tokens or something like that, you can help remain to have a board state even after a board wipe. Which gives you a really good advantage in the game. The next card we have is In Search of Greatness. It is a 2 green enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may cast a permanent spell from your hand with converted mana cost equal to 1 plus the greatest converted mana cost among other permanents you control without paying its mana cost. If you do not, scry 1. So in this case, if I have a creature that costs 2 and 2 green that's out on the battlefield, and I have a creature in my hand that costs 3 and 2 green, I can immediately play that card on my upkeep for free. Now, if let's just say I have a Soul Ring and I have a creature that costs the 2 and a green, I can play that creature for free. And even if I can't manage to be able to play a creature from my hand onto the battlefield during my upkeep, I still get to scry. And so for 2 green, for an enchantment that sticks around for every turn, and enchantments are harder to get rid of than artifacts, it's going to be nice to be able to scry before I draw to know, okay, well, do I need more lands? Do I need more creatures in my hand? Do I need some kind of mana ramp? So scrying can definitely help make the deck more consistent. Alright, and the next card we're going to go over is Descendants Path for 2 and a green. It is an enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, reveal the top card of your library so everybody gets to see what it is. If it's a creature card that shares a creature type with a creature you control, you may cast that card without paying its mana cost. Otherwise, put that card on the bottom of your library. So if you have a Wurm out, whether it's a Wurm creature token or an actual Wurm creature card, then you'll be able to play any Wurm that you reveal from the top of your deck directly on the battlefield without paying its mana cost. Now, this could definitely help when you have maybe a 1/1 Wurm creature token with Wurm calling, and with Descendants Path, now you're suddenly able to get out a 16/16 indestructible impervious Great Worm out for free that cost a lot of mana, and you didn't have to pay any mana, and now that 1/1 Wurm definitely helps you be able to play your creatures. Now, if you have no creatures out at all, you will have to reveal the top card of your library and immediately put it on the bottom of your library, because you do not have any legal target to cast without paying its mana cost, because it can't share a creature with a creature you don't have. So that's really the only downside. But for 2 and a green, to be able to cheat out creatures every turn on your upkeep is definitely a pretty good card. Next one is Court of Bounty. It's actually kind of a good multifaceted card. For 2 and 2 green for an enchantment, when Court of Bounty enters the battlefield, you become the monarch. So the monarch is at the end step of your turn. You go ahead, and as long as you're the monarch, you're able to draw a card. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. Now, you do not need to be the monarch to do this, so it really helps you be able to ramp and play that additional land every turn. And it can be any land, so it does not have to be a basic. And then the next part is, if you are the monarch, instead, you may put a creature or land card from your hand onto the battlefield. So if you're the monarch, you can go ahead and throw down one of your big creatures from your hand, and you do not need to worry about having to pay the mana cost. As well as being able to ramp if you're not the monarch is awesome, because the more you can ramp, the better it is. You can just pay your creatures with paying the full mana cost. Now, there's other ways to reduce the mana cost that we'll get to later, but right now, Court of Bounty, even if you're not the monarch, still does have really good value for the enchantment. Elvish Piper. Elvish Piper is a creature elf shaman that costs 3 and a green, and it says, for a green and tap, you may put a creature card from your hand onto the battlefield. Now, this is not casting. So if you pay Elvish Piper to a green and tap, and you put a creature card from your hand onto the battlefield, they cannot counter that creature because it is not being cast. They would have to counter the activated ability of Elvish Piper to stop you from playing your creature. And for 3 and a green, possibly by turn 2, you can play Elvish Piper. Turn 3, be able to have a really big Wurm creature token on, or creature, I should say, onto the battlefield. So Elvish Piper, yes, it is a 1/1, but still, with that ability, for 1 green, all your creatures basically cost 1 green, and your creatures are not able to be countered because they are not being cast. The next card we want to look at is Aid from the Cowl. It is an enchantment for 3 and 2 green. It has Revolts. At the beginning of your end step, if a permanent you controlled left the battlefield this turn, reveal the top card of your library. If it is a permanent card, you may put it onto the battlefield. Otherwise, you may put it on the bottom of your library. So a permanent card. This could be one of these enchantments that I've been talking about, because the deck does have quite a few enchantments as well as creatures. So typically you'll end up getting a creature or an enchantment. Either way, it's really good for you, because if a permanent I control left the battlefield, so if I had a creature token that died, or one of my creatures got taken out, well, if Aid from the Cowl is on the battlefield, at the beginning of my end step, I'm able to go ahead and typically the second main phase, be able to put another permanent onto the battlefield. And whether it's a creature or enchantment, either way, you're able to benefit for free. And it says put onto the battlefield, so again, it is not casting. So as long as they don't get rid of Aid from the Cowl before it would trigger or counter its triggered ability, you're going to be able to put that creature or enchantment onto the battlefield without your opponent being able to counter it. Next card, we have Lurking Predators. Lurking Predators is an enchantment for 4 and 2 green, so it's a little bit on the heavier side, but again, we even have ways to cheat that out, as well as good mana ramp to get this out earlier. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, reveal the top card of your library. If it is a creature card, put it onto the battlefield. Otherwise, you may put that card on the bottom of your library. So, we've seen cards like Ivy Elemental and Forgotten Ancient and various other things that whenever your opponent, Mana Gorger Hydra, whenever your opponent casts a spell, it gets like a +1/+1 counter. So in this case, instead of getting a +1/+1 counter on a creature, you actually get to reveal the top card of your library, and if it's a creature, put it on the battlefield. Now, if it's not a creature, especially when you have multiple players, typically 4 in your pod, you're able to have their turn, then the next player's turn, then the next player's turn, then finally your turn, and by the time it comes all the way back around to you, your opponents more than likely are going to play, especially by the time you get this card out, multiple spells. So that means that, oh, okay, there's a land on top of my library. You don't have to keep the land there. You are able to put that land on the bottom of your library, so the next time someone casts a spell, your chances of being able to get a creature are able to go up. So, and then because, again, they are not being cast for no mana, they are just being put on the battlefield. So the keywords there are really important. Usually if you play a really heavy like counter type deck or a control deck that really wants you to stop from casting stuff, this helps really get around that kind of thing. Alright, and the last card that we're going to go ahead and play that helps cheat out your creatures is Wild Pear. It is an enchantment for 4 and 2 green. It says, whenever a creature enters the battlefield, if you cast it from your hand, you may search your library for a creature card with the same total power and toughness and put it onto the battlefield. If you do, shuffle. Again, the first creature you do have to cast, but the creature you get from Wild Pear is not cast. Now let's just say I have a 7/7 creature that I just cast. What I'm able to do is then search my library as long as the casting of my creature resolves and find a creature with total power and toughness equal to, in this case it would be 14. So it doesn't have to be a 7/7. The way the card works is I could go grab like Panglacial Wurm, which is a 9/5, which is total power and toughness 14. So as long as the total power and toughness are equal, you're able to then put that card from your deck onto the battlefield without paying any kind of mana cost, without it being cast. It's just straight put onto the battlefield, and then if it has any kind of ETB or enter the battlefield effects, it's able to go ahead and trigger that as well. And we're going to go over our ramp. Now this deck has a lot of unique type ramp cards. A lot of them are enchantments instead of one-time ramp spells to search for lands. A lot of them are enchantments to help boost your mana production. So let's go ahead and get right on into it. The first card we have is Wild Growth. It's an enchantment for a land, cost 1 green. It says, whenever the usual mana is drawn from target land, Wild Growth provides an additional green. Of course, there is a current oracle that will be displayed on your screen of how this card currently reads, but basically whenever you enchant a land, when you tap it for mana, it will add 2 green in this case, instead of just its regular 1 green. Next one, we have Fertile Ground. Fertile Ground is an enchantment aura with 1 for 1 and a green. Whenever enchanted land is tapped for mana, its controller adds an additional 1 mana of any color. So in this case, it still will be green because it is a mono green deck. So you tap the land and you get 2 green. You could choose like a green and some other color. I'm not sure exactly why you would want to do that unless a very interesting kind of board state requires you or wants you to pay any other additional types of colors. But for this case, we definitely wanted to tap a land for 2 green. Alright, the next one we have is Overgrowth. It is an enchantment aura for 2 and a green. Whenever enchanted land is tapped for mana, the controller adds an additional 2 green. So now we're going to have 1 forest tap for 3 green. So it doesn't just tap for green green, and it taps for 3 green. So that's huge, because basically if I pay 3 mana to enchant a land that is untapped, now all the mana that I just spent to cast a spell, now in turn I'm able to get right back for the most part with the new forest. I technically would be minus down 1 mana from what I could have produced, but that's still awesome because now my lands are going to be tapping for way more mana. Enchantments are harder to get rid of than artifacts, and to be able to have so much mana pumped into your forests, and your forest being able to tap for so much mana, being able to play the more expensive mana costed cards is going to be so much easier. So let's go ahead and get on to the next one. It is New Horizons. It's an enchantment aura costing 2 and a green. It says, when New Horizons enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. So now I'm able to beef up my creature a little bit with a +1/+1 counter. An enchanted land has tap, add 2 mana of any one color. So in this case, we would be making green, but the land now taps for 2 instead of 1. And then after that, we're going to go on to a Gift of Paradise. Very similar to New Horizons. Gift of Paradise is an enchantment enchantment aura that costs 2 and a green. And then whenever Gift of Paradise enters the battlefield, you gain 3 life. So being able to gain life is a nice little benefit. And then enchant land has tap, add 2 mana of any one color. So we have several cards that make our lands tap for additional mana, and having several cards like this, the chance of being able to draw one or run into one to help ramp definitely goes up. Next card we have is Frontier Siege. It is an enchantment that costs 3 and a green. It says, as Frontier Siege enters the battlefield, choose cons or dragons. And in this case, we will mainly use it for cons. For cons, it says, at the beginning of your main phases, both pre-combat and post-combat main phase, so you do this twice every turn, add 2 green to your mana pool. So you basically get a total of 4 mana during your entire turn. So that is great for mana ramp. And then for dragons, whenever a creature with flying enters the battlefield under your control, you may have it fight target creature you don't control. I'm sure there's ways for my opponents to give my creatures flying while they enter the battlefield. Not exactly sure on the specific cards that may or may not be able to do that. But for this card, we really want to just only focus on the cons to be able to add that 2 green mana for each different main phase that we have. And then, because we're not running red, do not have an additional combat with an additional post-combat main phase, or else that, like in a red-green Gruul type deck, then we would actually be able to trigger it additional times for additional mana because it's each main phase. So let's go ahead and look at the next card here. It is Elemental Resonance for 2 and 2 green enchantment aura. At the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, add mana equal to enchanted permanent's mana cost to your mana pool. And so you enchant a permanent. So whether you want to enchant another enchantment or you want to enchant a creature, which is more than likely going to be the best case scenario, especially with the high CMC for your creatures. And then you don't have to tap your creature for the mana. You're able to just put all that mana equal to the CMC of that creature to your mana pool. So that can be equivalent to a lot of mana. If you have a really strong and high CMC creature and you're able to put all that mana into your mana pool, you may not actually have to tap any lands or use anything else to be able to get the mana to pay for almost any other creature or any other permanent that you want to play, or the very few spells in the deck that are not enchantments or creatures. So yeah, that is definitely a very powerful, I believe a very underrated card to be able to be played in Commander. Going on next, we have 3 visits. 3 visits is a sorcery for 1 and a green. Search your library for a forest card and put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. So basically the card will only cost 1 because you pay 1 and a green to grab a forest to put it on the battlefield. It does not enter tapped. So you'll definitely be able to immediately be able to use that mana if the circumstances allow you to or you have something to play, but it does enter untapped. And of course we have the iconic Soul Ring. Soul Ring only costs 1, comes into the battlefield, you're able to tap it to add 2 colorless to your mana pool. I believe almost every single Commander deck, with probably very, very few exceptions, is going to run Soul Ring, because on turn 2, if you have a Soul Ring that you played on turn 1, you have 4 or more mana you're able to have on your second turn, which gives you a huge advantage to play bigger spells earlier on in the game. Alright, next we have the first of 2 creatures that are not worms nor the commander. And that is, the first one is Sanctum Weaver from Modern Horizons 2. Sanctum Weaver is an enchantment creature dryad for 1 and a green. It says, tap, add X mana of any one color, where X is the number of enchantments you control. So it is an enchantment creature, so it does at least count itself, so it will tap for at least 1. This deck does have a lot of enchantments, so the chances of getting additional mana from this card definitely go way up. The next creature card we have is Solemn Simulacrum. It is an artifact creature golem that costs 4. Whenever Solemn Simulacrum enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a basic land card and put that card on the battlefield tap, then shuffle your library. So it is able to go ahead and fetch you a land, which is also nice for ramping. And then the little added bonus for Solemn Simulacrum is when it dies, you draw a card. And being a 2/2 creature, it is nice to be able to at least have a little bitty attacker or blocker or something like that, and it benefits when it dies. Mana ramp's great. Cheating creatures out is also great. But another great thing, especially with this kind of deck with really high CMC, where the mana curve definitely looks like it is going backwards on what you would ideally want, to be able to have cards to reduce how much your cards will cost to make your mana that you're able to put in your mana pool go even further. And these cards, I believe, actually are a little bit better than ramping in a traditional sense, because you can be able to increase the amount of mana value you get from them on each turn depending on what you're able to play. So the first one I want to look at is one of my favorite mana reducing cards, because of how versatile it is in so many different decks, is Cloud Key. Cloud Key is an artifact that costs 3. As Cloud Key enters the battlefield, choose artifact, creature, enchantment, instant, or sorcery. Spells you cast of the chosen type cost 1 less to cast. So in this deck, if I know I'm able to get creatures out real easy, my board's looking great, everything's running smooth for creatures, enchantments are costing a little bit of extra, and it's a little bit harder to get my enchantments out, I can just say enchantment, and now they all cost one less, which will definitely help me play additional enchantments. Let's just say I have enchantments out, but getting creatures is still becoming a little difficult, and in the situation and the cards I've drawn and kind of how the game's been playing out, I can name creatures. And if I really just want to play it out there for my few other spells, I can. In this deck, it's probably preferred to do creature or enchantment, but the fact that they cost one less, if I cast multiple ones of the chosen spell each turn, then I'll be able to get that mana multiplied by per spell that I'm playing. So I think that's great. Alright, next up we have Ronus's Monument. It is a legendary artifact that costs 3. Green creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Well, all my creatures, with the very exceptions of the solemn simulacrum, are green. So that's going to be able to help all my creatures that I'm casting. The next part is whenever you cast a creature spell, so if I cast Solemn Simulacrum, whether I am playing green or not green, any kind of creature spell that I cast, a target creature I control gets +2/+2 and gains trample till end of turn. So there's going to soon be a little bit of a trample theme going on here. So creatures cost less, I'm able to beef them up, then give them trample, just by simply casting a creature. And then the next one is actually the commander of the deck. It is Goreclaw, Terror of Calcisma. It's a legendary creature bear that costs 3 and a green. And real quick, on this specific card, I really wanted to find the best commander to be able to play mono green Wurm tribal deck. And I looked through every single possible option for a mono green tribal creature that would be able to really help play the worms without really making the game pretty much an automatic loss because of how expensive the CMC is for my worms. So when I saw Goreclaw, I was just like, that has to be my commander. It is an amazing commander card, especially for this deck, with high CMC creatures of strong power and toughness. And this is why. Goreclaw says, creature spells you cast with power 4 or greater cost 2 less to cast. That is almost every single creature. I believe there's just a few exceptions in the deck, but almost any creature that I cast is going to cost 2 less, which is huge. If I have a creature that costs 2 and 2 green, and yeah, I have the mana to spend it normally, well, now it would just cost 2 green, and I might be able to use mana to play something else. So it is a really amazing type of thing to be able to do to continually get benefit off of that. And then not only that, but the additional part is whenever Goreclaw, Terror of Calcisma, attacks, each creature you control with power 4 or greater gets +1/+1 and gains trample. So as long as Goreclaw is attacking with your other worms, if they don't have trample, they now get +1/+1. So at minimum they would be a 5/5, or whatever their toughness would be, at least 5 power, and gain trample. So you are going to have really big, smashy, stompy beaters on the board that now have trample. So being able to do damage to your opponent is going to go up because trample, for my personal favorites, and like flying is nice, haste is nice, vigilance is neat, but trample is probably, I would have to say, my favorite keyword for creatures to do. And we're going to be talking about trample, because we have these huge creatures Not all of them have trample themselves. We definitely want to ensure that our creatures are able to have trample to be able to do damage to our opponent. So first up, we're going to look at Primal Rage. It's an enchantment that costs 1 and a green, and it just simply says creatures you control have trample. So for 1 and a green, it's a really cheap spell to be able to cast. You might be able to do it turn 1, turn 2, and your creatures just have trample. You don't need to worry about paying for a higher mana value card to be able to give your creatures trample. Just for 1 and a green enchantment, your creatures have trample, and they can just go ahead and run over your opponents. Even late game, it's a really cheap spell to be able to play, and then possibly be able to put a creature onto the battlefield afterwards. But your creatures gain trample, just straightforward, easy, simple card, and it is one of my favorite enchantments for green, and I personally love to play creature decks, and so for this, with stompy creatures, it's great. Next, we want to look at Shadow Spear. It is a legendary artifact equipment that costs 1. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 and has trample and lifelink. So again, adding the trample, but in this case, we also have the added benefit of lifelink. So now we're able to possibly gain a bunch of life. And then for 1, you can have permanents your opponents control, make them lose hexproof and indestructible till end of turn. So that's great. Oh, well, I have this creature that's a 8/8 and they're blocking with a 2/2 indestructible creature. Yeah, stuff gets over, but I want their creature to die. So to be able to turn off the hexproof, to turn off the indestructible on their creature by just playing 1 mana is great, and then it only costs 2 to equip. So possibly turn 1, play a land, tap it, Shadow Spear. Or turn 1, play a land, Soul Ring, tap Soul Ring, Shadow Spear. Any kind of scenario like that. Shadow Spear is really easy to get out, and it's really easy to go ahead and equip to a creature, and then to start reaping the benefits from there. And being able to shut your opponents off from having hexproof and indestructible are definitely a really big added benefit. Next card we're going to look at is a creature. It's from the Strixhaven set, Master Symmetrist. It is a creature rhino druid that costs 2 and 2 green. It has reach, so helping block the pesky flyers. And then whenever a creature you control attacks with power equal to its toughness attacks, it gains trample till end of turn. So I have a 6/6, a 7/7, a 5/5, an 8/8, a 15/15. Regardless of which one it is, it will gain trample. And including itself, it doesn't have trample as a keyword ability, but because it is a 4/4, it will automatically give itself, as long as the power and toughness when it attacks is not altered by changing only one of the value of power or toughness, it will even give itself trample, which is nice. So your creatures being able to gain trample simply by attacking, by having the same power and toughness, is great. Next card we're going to look at is Nylia, God of the Hunt. It is a legendary enchantment creature god. It costs 3 and a green. It has indestructible, and as long as your devotion to green is less than 5, Nylia is not a creature. Other creatures you control have trample, so that's definitely the big thing, is having trample. And then for 3 and a green, so as many times as you want to pay into this, a target creature gets +2/+2 till end of turn. So let's just say I have a total of 9 mana, or not 9 mana, let's just say 9, 10, 11, 12 mana that I just have open, nothing else in my hand to be able to really play. I can go ahead and pump a creature up and make it +6/+6, and it already has trample because of the other ability on Nylia. So now my creature, even if it's a 1/1, is going to be a 7/7 with trample. And if I have a really large creature already, I can beef it up even more and while it has trample, and be able to possibly take an opponent out. Next creature we're going to look at is a very interesting creature. It is indeed a Wurm. So finally looking into the Wurm creatures. For this one, it is Pathbreaker Wurm. Creature Wurm costs 4 and 2 green. It has Soul Bond. You may pair this creature with another unpaired creature when either enter the battlefield. They remain paired for as long as you control both of them. As long as Pathbreaker Wurm is paired with another creature, both creatures have trample. So this was actually a Wurm that I had to, put into the deck afterwards, because I had another Wurm that had vanishing on it. It was a cheaper Wurm to try to get into play, but it didn't last very long. And I really wanted to focus a lot heavier on the trample and what can give trample, but not lose the count of the amount of worms that I had in the deck, because of the cheat creature spells can rely on looking at the top card of your library. So I really wanted to keep the number of worms high in the deck for those spells or enchantments to be able to occur much better than they normally would with a lower count of worms. And then the next card is Garrick's Uprising. It is an enchantment that costs 2 and a green. Whenever Garrick's Uprising enters the battlefield, if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, draw a card. So most of the time you will be able to draw a card. Creatures you control have trample. And then lastly, whenever a creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card. So now almost any time you play a creature, you're going to be drawing a card. 9 times out of 10, you're just going to be, bam, I play this creature, and it's just whenever it enters the battlefield. So whether I cast it, or whether I go ahead and search my library, and then put it onto the battlefield, either way, I'm able to more than likely be able to draw a card, which is great. Leads me into the next segment of card draw. So in the card draw, we do have a few cards that are able to help us draw. And in the first instance, what we want to do is look at Sixth Sense. Sixth Sense is an enchantment aura that costs 1 green. You enchant a creature, and enchanted creature has, whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, you may draw a card. Now, again, with everything mainly having trample for the most part, trample being able to get over some of those smaller creatures, being able to do combat damage is a lot easier with the trample, to then be able to draw an additional card. And because it's on that creature, so basically every time that I attack with it, there's a chance that I'll probably be able to draw a card every time I attack. The next card is going to be Colossal Majesty. Colossal Majesty is an enchantment that costs 2 and a green, and at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, draw a card. So on my upkeep, I'm able to more than likely draw a card, and then go to my draw step and draw an additional card. And being 2 cards per turn definitely helps with my card draw. Turn 2, it's usually pretty easy to be able to play this card. So additional card draw, and then with mana ramp, card draw plus mana ramp equals you get the best value, especially in green and in mono green. The 2 combos of draw a lot of cards, have a lot of mana. Now, because you have a lot of mana and you have a lot of cards to play using that mana. So the next card is Life Crafter's Bestiary. It is an artifact that costs 3. It says at the beginning of your upkeep, scry 1. So during your upkeep to scry is definitely a really helpful thing to do, and that can help give you an advantage to be able to draw possibly what you need. And then whenever you cast a creature spell, you may pay green if you do draw a card. So yeah, Garrick's Uprising definitely allows you to draw cards without paying any mana, but possibly paying 1 green to be able to draw an additional card. You will have so much mana in this deck that you will definitely be able to easily pay that 1 green mana to draw an additional card. Next up, we have Garrick Primal Hunter for 2 and 3 green. It is a legendary planeswalker, Garrick. Starts off with 3 loyalty counters. +1, create a 3/3 green beast creature token. So you will be able to create beast tokens. It's not synergistic with the worms, but that's okay. They are 3/3 creatures that do help keep yourself safe. It helps protect himself, and it does increase his loyalty by creating creatures, which is great. -3, draw cards equal to the greatest power among creatures you control. So you could -3 him immediately and kill him, as if you have a really big creature out and you don't have any cards in hand, or maybe 1 or 2 cards in your hand, you more than likely will be able to draw and fill your entire hand up with that. And then -6, create a 6/6 green worm creature token for each land you control. Now, I have gotten this ultimate off a few times because so many people are focused on any kind of targeted removal directly on my creatures, because my creatures do make me a target. They are massive creatures that are hitting the board really early on in the game and consistently. It makes me pretty much a target the whole game. And so being able to then ultimate this, some people forget that he's even there because you're making these 3/3 green beast creature tokens that don't seem to be as big of a problem as your other worms, and then out of nowhere you're creating a slew of worms. All of a sudden, here's 10 6/6 green worm creature tokens that when I attack with my commander, they're all 7/7s with trample. And then now what are you going to do? I'm doing 70 plus damage to anywhere on the board with trample. So yeah, it's going to be really hard to be able to handle that as soon as I try to ultimate. But even without the ultimate, I'm going to have so many different creatures on the board that it's going to just get silly. In this section, we're going to be talking about the worms that help produce creature tokens, as well as the various other cards in the deck that help produce worms. So first off, we want to start off with Penumbra Wurm. Penumbra Wurm is a creature worm that costs 5 and 2 green. It's a 6/6 creature with trample, and when Penumbra Wurm dies, create a 6/6 black worm creature token with trample. So not only is it a 6/6 with trample, which is nice, but when it dies, it basically replaces itself with another 6/6 with trample. So someone board wipes, you pretty much have the same creature on the board with same power and toughness with trample, so that definitely is great. Next up, we have Worldspine Wurm. It's a creature worm, 15/15, and it costs 8 and 3 green. It has trample, and when Worldspine Wurm dies, put 3 5/5 green worm creature tokens with trample onto the battlefield. And when Worldspine Wurm is put into the graveyard from anywhere, shuffle it into owner's library. So with someone board wipes, or even targeted removal, because this creature is huge, you create 3 5/5 green worm creature tokens with trample. So that's definitely a huge benefit of losing your creature, to be able to fill your board back up immediately. Next up, we have Wurm Coil Engine, artifact creature worm, cost 6. This is definitely probably one of the most popular worms, as well as Worldspine Wurm. This creature is a 6/6. It has Death Touch and Lifelink, both of which are great. And when Wurm Coil Engine dies, put a 3/3 colorless worm artifact creature token with Death Touch and a 3/3 colorless worm artifact creature token with lifelink on the battlefield. So basically you kill it and it splits off into 2 parts. One part is a 3/3 with the Death Touch, and then the other one is the 3/3 with lifelink. So you end up getting 2 creatures when it dies, and then those creatures share one of the keywords of the original creature. And then next up, we have a Symbiotic Wurm. Now this does not create worm creature tokens, but it does create creature tokens. Symbiotic Wurm is creature worm. It's a 7/7 that costs 5 and 3 green. When Symbiotic Wurm is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, put 7 1/1 green insect creature tokens onto the battlefield. So you are able to swarm the field with a bunch of 1/1s. Definitely makes great good chunk blockers if you need to when your creature dies, and it definitely helps protect you against a backlash after a board wipe. You still have something to be able to protect against possibly a barrage of different things. So going into the non-creature cards to create the creature tokens. First off, we have a sorcery called Roar of the Wurm. It costs 6 and a green. It says create a 6/6 green worm creature token. So 6 and a green, that's a lot of mana. But it does have flashback. For 3 and a green, you may cast this card from your graveyard for its flashback cost and exile it. So there's a good chance we end up paying the flashback cost instead of its regular casting cost, but the way the deck ramps, I've been able to cast this card a few times with its regular cost and then go back and play its flashback cost. And because you get a 6/6 creature in the field, that's big. It's probably going to stick around and may be worth playing. And then with a flashback, so you're able to create basically 2 6/6 green worm creature tokens with just one single card. Next up, we have Crush of Worms. It's a sorcery for 6 and 3 green, so 2 more green than the Roar of Worms. And this card, it says put 3 6/6 green worm creature tokens into play. So definitely more powerful when it comes to how many creature tokens you're putting out for the worms. And then it has flashback for 9 and 3 green. So again, you're able to play this card twice, and this one will give you a total of 6 total 6/6 green worm creature tokens, which is a lot of potential damage, especially in a deck that has several ways of getting trample and being able to do excess damage to your opponent by just swarming with big creatures. Next up, we have Sandworm Convergence. It's an enchantment that costs 6 and 2 green. Creatures with flying cannot attack you or planeswalkers you control. That's just the first part, which is already great, so you don't have to worry about flyers, which a lot of people, like usually one person on the board has flyers, and everybody's like, oh man, do I have something with reach, or maybe I have one creature with flying in my deck, or maybe I have like a artifact equipment or something to give flying to my creatures, but they scramble to search for something to try to help protect against flyers. This says flying creatures can't attack you, so you don't need to worry about getting hit with flying creatures, which is awesome. The second part of the card is at the beginning of your end step, create a 5/5 green worm creature token. So just bam, here's a 5/5 green worm creature token at every end step. Each of your end steps, my bad. So a 5/5 green worm creature token every end step, board wipe. Oh, well, I still have this enchantment out. End step, 5/5 green worm creature token. And then it comes back around you again, and another 5/5 green worm creature token. And you get to beef those up and give them trample, and you see where it's going. It's going to be hard to get rid of these worms, and as you can see so far, it's going to be easy, a lot easier than a lot of people would assume to be able to get these worms out. And then the last creature token card is Worm Calling. It's a sorcery for an X in green. Excuse me, it has buyback for 2 and a green. You may pay an additional 2 and a green as you play this spell. If you do, put this card into your hand as it resolves. And the card does put an XX green worm creature token into play. So, however many mana you pay outside of the additional green, you can make an XX green worm creature token. Now, when you do the buyback for the 2 and a green, it's the 2, a green, and a green that are outside of X if you try to play the buyback cost. So if I want it to be a 1/1, I would have to spend 1 for X, 2 and a green for buyback, or 1 for X, the regular green, and then another 2 and a green for it to simply be a 1/1 if I want buyback. Now if I want it to be using the same mana but not buyback, that other 3 mana that I would use for buyback would make it a 3/3 green Wurm creature token. But definitely it comes into play. If you just have a bunch of mana sitting there, you can make a really big creature. And if you don't have a lot of mana, you still might be able to get a little creature. And like I said earlier on in the video about the Descendants Path, making that little 1/1, even if you don't do the buyback and just spend 2 mana, just so you have a Wurm creature token onto the battlefield to activate the Descendants Path to be able to go off properly instead of automatically putting the top card to the bottom of your library, is a really good thing. It's a lot simpler, just 2 simple cards. We have these big creatures. Let's just say sorry about the wiggle. Let's just say our opponent has ways to stop your creatures in some sort of blocking to take all the damage where the trample doesn't go anywhere, possibly indestructible creatures or something going on. What can you do? How can you make these things unblockable? Even better than trample, unblockable. Well, there's 2 routes. In Commander, most people play non-basic lands. Almost every deck I've seen plays someone is on the table or in your pod is going to be playing non-basic lands. One of the best cards that I'm really surprised not almost every deck runs, and it's a fairly cheap card in a monetary sense, is Trailblazer's Boots. It's an artifact enchantment that costs 2. It says equipped creature has non-basic land walk and equips for 2. Non-basic land walk. It is unblockable if the opponent has a non-basic land. So fetch lands and shock lands and any kind of tapped lands and dual lands. If it is not, whether this be the snow-covered basics or your regular basics, you're going to be unblockable. So you throw it on one of your really big creatures and you just go straight to their face. You're going to be doing a lot of damage with that creature that it's equipped to. The next card is a staple in a lot of different decks, actually, is Rogue's Passage. Rogue's Passage is a non-basic land. It taps to add colorless to mana pool, or you can pay 4, tap it, and target creature cannot be blocked this turn. So for 4 mana, you can make one of your beefy worms unblockable. So that is a huge benefit. And for the other spells in this deck, we have Rabid Bite. Rabid Bite is a sorcery for 1 and a green. Target creature you control deals combat damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control. So if they have something like a Death Touch creature and you really don't want to attack that player to kill your creature, you could do damage to their Death Touch creature and no damage is dealt to your creature to take that creature out. Also, you can just basically take out, because of how strong your creatures are, pretty much anything anybody has, as long as it doesn't have indestructible or hexproof or shroud. And then the card after that is Ram Through. Ram Through is kind of a similar card. It's an instant for 1 and a green. Target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to target creature you control. If the creature you control has trample, excess damage is dealt to that creature's controller instead. So our creatures typically will have trample. So this will, even though it's not combat damage, this basically allows trample to work outside of combat when fighting another creature. So, well, it's almost like fighting because they're not dealing actual damage to us, but the access damage to be able to go through is actually nice. And as an instant, someone attacks us, I play this, my creature does damage to their creature and access damage to my opponent after they declare their attackers, kill their attacker. So they actually take damage before the damage step from this card. It's a really good card, and I actually am thinking about adding more of these to my decks because I really love the big, stompy, ramp, throw creatures in your opponent's face kind of decks. Then we have Heroic Intervention. Heroic Intervention is probably one of the most popular instant cards, especially in Commander. It is for 1 and a green. It's an instant. Permanents you control gain hexproof and indestructible till end of turn. Anti-board wipe, anti-targeted removal. It is an amazing card. The only way to really stop it is to try to counter this card. It's awesome. It will definitely save your board state if you have so many worms just all over your board, and then you just throw a heroic intervention down. It can totally change the way the game is going to be going, because you save yourself. Everybody else is now wondering, oh no, I have no blockers, no way to stop everything I got going on. People may concede, or the game ends a turn or two after that gets played. And then we have Instill Energy. Instill Energy is probably one of my favorite enchantments, because it's a very unique type of enchantment. Instill Energy it's an enchantment for a creature, cost 1 green. You may untap target creature 1 additional time during your turn. Target creature may also attack the turn it comes into play. So, some people might think this is haste. This is not haste. Haste allows your creatures to tap to activate an ability. This does not. You can untap it, but untap it an additional time during each turn, which can work on turns outside of the first turn. Excuse me. But if you attack, the creatures in the deck do not have vigilance, so they tap to attack. And because it can attack the turn it comes into play, I'm able to then untap it, declare it as an attacker, and then untap it. Because you can untap at instant speed, which is great. So to be able to do that during an additional time during my turn, it's basically giving my creature vigilance, semi-haste, outside of the allowing it to tap. And so yeah, it's a great card. And if you put this on the Sanctum Weaver, because it's also an enchantment, well, at minimum tap for 2, untap, tap for another 2. So that also helps with being able to boost mana if you put it on the right creature. And then last but not least on the regular spells is Naturalize. It's an instant for 1 and a green, destroy artifact or enchantment. Just pretty basic, targeted removal on artifact or enchantment. If you see something scary going on, like someone has an exquisite blood and they're just 1 turn away from winning, or like a Simic Ascendancy, or some kind of shenanigans going on with artifact or enchantments, trying to create some kind of value engine that might turn infinite, bam, destroy one of the major pieces. Don't really need to worry about that. And so it's there for when happens on the board that's not on your side of the board. Next part, before we go over all the rest of the worms in the deck, there are 3 worms in particular that do pretty close to the same thing. So I kind of just grouped them all together for this. It is Bookworm, Ravenous Lidworm, and Palaka Worm. Bookworm, a creature worm, costs 7 and a green for a 7/7. It has Trample. Whenever it enters battlefield, gain 3 life and draw a card, so that's nice. And then for 2 and a green, put Bookworm from your graveyard into your library, 3rd from the top. So you're able to basically replay this card by paying a little extra mana to put it back in your library, 3rd from the top. If you have draw support, then you might be able to get it in your hand pretty quick, or you might be able to draw a couple cards and then maybe on your upkeep have one of the cheat creature out cards and put it into play for free. If you try to pay attention to where it is for when your triggers happen, to know how to stack your in the beginning of your upkeep triggers, which resolution you want to happen first when you put this back in your library, if you decide to do so. But to be able to gain life, draw a card, have a 7/7 with trample, it's honestly a really good card. Well, I would say for worms. Ravenous Lidworm. Ravenous Lidworm, a creature worm, 4 and 2 green for a 6/6. When it enters battlefield, gain 4 life. So it doesn't have trample, but as again, we have so many different ways to get trample in the deck. And for a 6/6, it's a pretty strong creature to be able to stand most of what your opponents will have. And then last is the Palaka Worm. Creature worm, that's a 7/7 that costs 4 and 3 green. It has trample. When it enters battlefield, you gain 7 life. And then when it dies, draw a card. So it has value coming in, value going out, and value while attacking. So it's definitely a valuable card to be able to play it, be able to have trample, gain life, draw a card. It's a pretty good, solid worm. Alright, then in the next section, we're just going to go ahead and finish it off with the worms of the deck. These I'm going to go over a little bit quicker, just to kind of shorten the length of the video, but I'll definitely have all the cards kind of displayed somewhere right here. So if you want to pause the video and go ahead and read the card, because trying to read it on the screen is going to be a little bit difficult without me holding it up to the screen like that. Alright, so first one, Greater Sandworm. It is a 7/7 that costs 5 and 2 green, cannot be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less, and has cycling 2. Engulfing Slagworm is a creature worm that's a 7/7 that costs 5 and 2 green. Whenever Engulfing Slagworm blocks or becomes blocked by a creature, destroy that creature, and then you gain life equal to that creature's toughness. So it allows me to gain life, as well as be able to destroy a creature before the damage calculation is considered, or before, any damage calculation is considered. I destroy that creature and gain the life. Duskdale Worm. It is a creature worm that's a 7/7 with trample, cost 5 and 2 green. Next we have Carnage Worm. Creature worm, it's a 6/6 that costs 6 and a green, has Bloodthirst 3 and trample. Next up we have kind of more of a cartoony art. I kind of like this one for its artwork. It is Battering Worm. Creature worm, 4/3, costs 6 and a green. It has Bloodthirst 1, and creatures with power less than Battering Worm's power cannot block it. Next we have one of the beefiest creatures. It is Impervious Great Worm. It is a creature worm, a 16/16 creature that costs 7 and 3 green. It has Convoke and Indestructible. This is a powerhouse. You give this thing trample, it's scary. Because now you have an indestructible trample 16/16 creature running around on the board. Your opponents are going to want to try to take care of that. Next up we have Plated Slagworm. Plated Slagworm is a creature worm for an 8/8, costs 4 and 3 green, and has hexproof. Next up is actually a non-worm creature. One of the very few non-worm creatures in the deck is Destiny Spinner. Destiny Spinner is an enchantment creature human, costs 1 and a green for a 2/3. And it says creatures and enchantment spells you control can't be countered. Well, hey, this deck is mainly creatures and enchantments. So that definitely works for not being able to be countered. So if anybody is playing kind of blue countery control, anything like that, as long as this is on the board and doesn't get countered itself, because this can be countered, but after it's on the battlefield, other things cannot be countered. It's great. It really helps against those type of decks. And then for 3 and a green, target land you control becomes an XX elemental creature with trample and haste till end of turn, where X is the number of enchantments you control. It is still a land. So, push come to shove, you're able to make one of your lands a pretty beefy creature and swing with a land. Next up, we have Arrogant Wurm. It's creature Wurm. It's a 4/4, costs 3 and 2 green, and it has madness for 2 and a green. So if you discard the card, you can actually pay it for its madness cost and put it on the battlefield. Next up, we have Soul Swallower. It's creature Wurm, 3/3, costs 2 and 2 green, has trample and delirium. At the beginning of your upkeep, if there are 4 or more cards among card types in your graveyard, put 3 +1/+1 counters on Soul Swallower. Getting the effect of the delirium is a little bit harder, just because we mainly run creatures and enchantments. There are a few artifacts, and there are a few sorceries and instants, and of course there's plenty of lands. So you are able to get it, the creature to be able to resolve getting the additional counters every turn, but usually he's a better creature to be able to draw later in the game to play, while your graveyard starts adding up to what it has. Next is Gravetiller Wurm, creature Wurm. It's a 4/4, costs 5 and a green, has trample and morbid. Whenever Gravetiller Wurm enters the battlefield, a Gravetiller Wurm enters the battlefield with 4 +1/+1 counters on it if a creature died this turn. So typically you want to play this post combat phase. Next is Sifter Wurm. It's a creature Wurm, 7/7, costs 5 and 2 green. He has trample, and whenever Sifter Wurm enters battlefield, scry 3, then reveal the top card of your library, gain life equal to that card's converted mana cost. We have heavy converted mana costs in the deck, so you may have a chance to gain a good amount of life, and because you're scrying, you can kind of stack that top card to be a higher mana costed card, and it also helps you with the other cheating creatures into play, kind of upkeep triggers to have a big worm creature token or creature on top of your deck. So it works out both ways when you do that. Elder Scale Wurm. Elder Scale Wurm is awesome. It has saved my butt in a few games. Elder Scale Wurm, creature Wurm, 7/7, costs 4 and 3 green. It has trample, and whenever Elder Scale Wurm enters the battlefield, if your life total is less than 7, your life total becomes 7. So if I'm 6, 5, 4, 3, or 2, or 1 life, it now becomes 7 life. And then as long as you have 7 or more life, so you were guaranteed to at least have 7 life when he enters battlefield successfully. As long as you have 7 or more life, damage that would reduce your life total to less than 7 reduces it to 7 instead. Now, damage that reduces my life to less than 7. If I'm forced to pay life, I could still die by my life going to 0. But if I'm not forced in a way to pay life, I'm not going to block anything. People can go ahead and swing at me all day long, and I'm not going to take any damage. And because I don't take any damage, because the damage is reduced to my life being 7 instead, it's a replacement effect. So I don't take the damage and then it goes back up to 7. It's the damage is replaced to equal my life total, not going below 7. So if I had 8 life, they could do 1 point of damage and I would be dealt damage and just go down 1. So if I have 8 life and they attack me with a 9/9 and I don't block it, I actually only take 1 damage, but that can matter with some cards. Taking damage whenever this creature deals combat damage to an opponent do this kind of effect. So if I only have 7 and they attack me, I don't actually take damage. The damage is actually replaced with no damage at all. So it's a pretty good card. Next up we have Bellowing Tangleworm. Creature Wurm is a 4/4 with 3 and 2 green, and it has Intimidate. This creature can't be blocked by artifact creatures and or creatures that share a color with it. Other green creatures you control have Intimidate. So another way for your creatures to potentially not be blocked. Next up is one of my absolute favorite cards. It is Glacial Wurm. It is a creature worm. It's a 9/5, costs 5 and 2 green, has trample, and whenever you're searching your library, you may play Glacial Wurm from your library. Excuse me. So that's awesome. Just straight up, oh, let's play 3 visits to go search for a land. Oh, and then while I'm doing that, I'm going to go ahead and play my Glacial Wurm straight from my library while I'm searching my library. That's pretty cool. And because you can play it from your library, you have to pay the casting cost. And if something reduces the casting cost, it's cheaper. Next is Vigorspore Wurm. Vigorspore Wurm, creature worm, is a 6/4, costs 5 and a green. It has Undergrowth. Whenever Vigorspore Wurm enters the battlefield, target creature gains vigilance and +X till end of turn, where X is the number of creature cards in your graveyard. And the Vigorspore Wurm cannot be blocked by more than one creature. Actually, there is an exception. There's 32 forests, and I just forgot and realized, and my apologies for that. I do run Treetop Village. It's a non-basic land. Enters battlefield taps to add green to mana pool. For 1 and a green, it can become a 3/3 green ape creature token with our creature with trample till end of turn, and it is still a land. The other land in here is a non-basic land called Oran Reef the Vastwood. Enters battlefield it taps to add green to mana pool, or I can tap to put a +1/+1 counter on each green creature that entered the battlefield this turn. So synergy with the green creatures, and anything that enters battlefield, kind of bump it up some, make it a little bit more powerful, even though they're already extremely powerful. I definitely hope that you enjoyed this little deck review kind of thing for a unique deck list for Commander / EDH. This deck is definitely not a CEDH level at all. That I think is on a whole different category that I personally do not enjoy, but no offense to those that do enjoy that, because everybody does enjoy their own way to play, their own type of speed, their own kind of deck construction. But my personal opinion is that I like a more casual, a little bit of a longer game where you see a lot more cards interact instead of things just counter, blow up, stop you, counter, blow up, stop you. I'm more of craziness happen on the board. It might take me an hour and a half, 2 hours to play a game, but I want to see some crazy interaction, some very unexpected things that you might not normally see, and I find that in competitive Magic personally, but again, that is my opinion. I'm personally more of a casual EDH player, because I personally enjoy it, and the decks that I make, I try to just make other casual decks, whether it be a high power level or lower power level, but I never really build anything to a CEDH level, because I know there's a lot of people out there that are not able to afford the really expensive cards that CEDH players tend to have to make them so competitive and really quick paced, because of the price tag's pretty big. And I know with the pandemic going on and everything else going on in the world, and some mayhem, financial issues and stuff like that, to be able to have decks that are more in the lines of affordability, or maybe it might take you a couple months, but it's more in the range of being able to make the deck and be more affordable. This deck is pretty close to about $150 to $175 from start to finish, which is pretty close to most decks that I currently have, with an exception of one deck's a little bit more than that, but the decks tend to be a lot more affordable. So I definitely hope that you enjoyed this video. Go ahead and click the thumbs up button down below if you've liked this video. Go ahead and leave a comment, and definitely hit that subscribe button to be notified anytime any and all new videos appear on this channel, and just tell me what you think. Anything that you would want me to add, subtract from the channel. This is a new starting channel. Anything that you do with the likes and the comments and the subscriptions will definitely help me out and be able to continue to have me be on this channel with more new content, and to be able to improve the quality of the videos and the content that I provide.